Since Terminator Genisys is going to be released in a couple days, I thought, why not talk about every single Terminator film leading up to the 5th installment? Or at least I'll try talking about every single Terminator. And what better way to start that off than to talk about the original that kicked off the legendary franchise? Okay, so the Terminator. The Terminator follows the story of a normal woman named Sarah Connor who's kind of down on her luck. Things aren't necessarily going her way, but she doesn't know that she has a greater destiny. That is, a cyborg from the future known as the Terminator gets sent back to 1984 Los Angeles to kill Sarah Connor. But at the same time, a soldier also from the future named Kyle Reese gets sent back assigned to protect Sarah Connor from the Terminator, allowing this destiny she has to be fulfilled. So now these two have to race to get to Sarah Connor first, engaging in a battle against time that may in fact determine the fate of the human race. Now, the original Terminator was released in 1984, and that was a perfect time for it to get released since it was a year after the conclusion of the original Star Wars trilogy. So people were thinking, well, what now with the science fiction genre? And then the Terminator gets released, and it became an icon forever. Not only did it put writer-director James Cameron on the map, Arnold Schwarzenegger, the action star we know him today, but it also reshaped how action sci-fi films should be made. I could go on a whole list on what the original Terminator did for film in general, and hopefully I can do that in this review. And for anybody who hasn't seen the 1984 Terminator, a little bit of warning, I am going to talk about this movie in detail, so if you don't want anything spoiled, go watch it, then come back here. Are you still here? Awesome. Let's talk about some Terminator. First off, the acting was good throughout the movie. Linda Hamilton as Sarah Connor, who plays a woman who really has the shittiest luck, like I mentioned before. When you first see her, she's riding on her dumb little 80s motor scooter to work with her big hair flying through the wind. And she works as a server at this one restaurant. She's not really good at her job, and she gets stood up by her boyfriend the same night, so she's having a really shitty day, but she doesn't know that it's about to get worse. And Michael Biehn as Kyle Reese really set a standard on how Kyle Reese should be in the Terminator franchise. Throughout the movie, he's this extremely damaged and somewhat emotionless character, and he does explain later that he has controlled certain emotions. And it makes sense because he came from a future where everything is destroyed, so him bringing those sets of emotions on this mission, I buy it. But let's talk about the one that was the true driving force in villainy, and that is the Terminator played by Arnold Schwarzenegger. He plays a cyborg who's this lifeless, killing organism programmed to kill Sarah Connor, and as Kyle Reese explains it, he will not stop until she is dead. This is the role that made Arnold Schwarzenegger the icon we know him today, from the action he brings to the table to his one-liners, and his famous one-liner is, "I'll be back." Not gonna try to say it, I'm terrible at that. But everything that you see in an 80s action star, you see it in the character of the Terminator. But the few things that made the Terminator so iconic is the consistency of excellent storytelling and original screenplay from James Cameron. Throughout the movie, it's this one big mystery on why the Terminator and Kyle Reese treat Sarah Connor like she is a big deal, which of course they explain later in the film. In the beginning, it has a crazy strong introduction of the Terminator, setting it up on how he's gonna be as a villain. He kills a couple punks, a gun shop owner to get the weapons he needs, and kills every single woman in LA named Sarah Connor. Kyle Reese, on the other hand, was able to find her instantly, which they explain later on how he did that. But up until the scene at the nightclub, you finally know where these two leads stand, the Terminator being the antagonist and Kyle Reese being the protagonist. And through the Terminator's chase after Sarah Connor, you learn to find out how fleshed out the story, the character of Kyle Reese, and even how the future war actually is. And what's awesome is how much the Terminator has this 80s cyberpunk feel to it, and that's all thanks to the aesthetic, the action, and the score to this movie. Because the Terminator has action pieces that continues to influence action movies today, because when you watch it play out, you see how smooth the camera work is. Not only that, but it's also entertaining to watch car chases and motorcycle chases. We all love those, and the Terminator has all those traits within the action. On top of that, have a pretty sweet score to go along with it as well, with this trademark Terminator theme that goes like dun 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 dun. It's one of those things where you don't have to be a huge fan to really know where that theme came from. It's that big. And you're able to see how this movie screams 80s cyberpunk through that terrific score and unique aesthetic. One scene in particular where Kyle Reese has a dream sequence of him fighting in the future war, that has got to be one of the greatest scenes in the entire movie. The way he's armored as this futuristic marine, showcasing that humans in 2029 are indeed struggling to fight against the machine. And you actually get to see the futuristic war a couple times in Terminator. They don't show it just to show it, but it gave that feel like there's a sense of hopelessness in the future. That is, until John Connor arrives, igniting that spark of hope within the human race. Because the whole reason why Sarah Connor is a huge deal in the first place is because later on in her life, she gives birth to her son named John Connor, who is destined to be the leader of the human resistance. So the Terminator was sent back to kill John, while Kyle Reese is trying to protect John through Sarah. Because there's something in this movie that I like to call the 4 pivotal scenes that helps develop Kyle Reese's character and further elevates the future future war. The first one being is the car scene where Kyle Reese and Sarah Connor are hiding from the Terminator, and Kyle Reese explains the origins of the future war and how everything in LA will soon be destroyed. He goes on to say how the machines used to be a defense network computer that was linked to everything. They just got smart and they just viewed humanity as a threat. It's sort of like Ultron in a way. See, even Ultron takes influence from the Terminator. But Reese soon describes his life during the war and how he grew up knowing only that, and how he was starving and hiding from the hunter-killers, basically working as a slave. And of course, John Connor rising up, teaching people how to fight, and basically becoming the symbol of hope. The second one being the interrogation of Kyle Reese, because in the middle of the movie he gets arrested. And this one just answers all the questions that the audience may have, like when the psychiatrist in the police station asks, well, why not they just kill John Connor instead of his mother? And Kyle Reese says, well, it would make no difference because the humans already have that knowledge to wipe out the machine. So taking out Sarah Connor now means that the machines made by Cyberdyne have won, since they have taken out that knowledge. They only knew where Sarah Connor lived because during the war, Skynet lost all records regarding her, and the only piece of information that they had was where she lived at the time. So it makes sense when the Terminator goes around killing every woman named Sarah Connor in Los Angeles, because he had no idea what she looks like. And of course, after the interrogation, the Terminator arrives and just starts shooting up the place, and that's really the awesome thing about this movie. When they settle down to talk about the future war and John Connor, that is when the Terminator arrives to cause trouble, and it makes up for some pretty sweet action sequences. The third pivotal scene is when they take shelter in that cave, and Sarah Connor treats Kyle Reese after he gets shot at the police station. And Sarah asks him to talk about her son, and he goes on saying how he's strong and how he has Sarah's eyes and that he would die for John Connor. He then expresses that dedication when he reveals that he volunteered to go back in time to meet the legend Sarah Connor, who taught her son how to fight and organize and prepared him as a child. Because he's saying all these nice things about Sarah, but she doesn't see it. She doesn't believe that she is the legend that she is going to be. And that's a pretty huge weight to carry on her shoulders, and Sarah Connor says, well, I don't want this honor at all. Then Kyle Reese delivers a message to Sarah from John Connor himself, saying that she must stay strong because without her, he wouldn't be able to exist. And what's great about those times of rest is that we are given a great balance of characters by seeing how the Terminator is preparing for his next move. And there's that one scene where he has to cut out his eye, and it's so funny because you get to see animatronic Arnold Schwarzenegger. Even back in the 80s, it looked cheesy, but in a way it presented how the Terminator looked like beneath the skin. Arnold even fixes his hair when he's done taking out his eyeball. It's like, what the heck, dude? And the last pivotal scene is when Reese and Sarah get out of that cave and arrive at that motel. When they have time to relax and patch up, Sarah goes on to ask Kyle, well, do you have anyone special at home? He says no, because in the war, John Connor gave him a picture of Sarah, and in it he describes how she looked sad and always wondered what she was thinking about at that moment. He memorized that picture completely, which harkens back on how he found her so easy, and then he reveals that he loves her and that he traveled back through time for her. And from there, they bang in the motel and they make John Connor. So that's why John gave him the picture, because he knew that Reese would be the father, so he basically told him to go bang his mom? It's weird shit right there. John Connor is made though. From there, we get an action sequence and later leads to the Terminator revealing his true self. And in that battle, Kyle Reese gets killed and Sarah Connor would eventually go on to defeat the Terminator. Why I skimmed through that so fast is because it's something that you visually need to experience yourself. It's a pretty sweet action sequence. And at the end of the movie, we see how Sarah Connor is preparing John Connor because she is now pregnant with him. She is talking to her audio recordings about Reese without specifically giving his name away, when all of a sudden this random Mexican boy comes up to her and takes a picture of her. And it's that same picture that John Connor would later give to Kyle Reese. And it's very tragic in a way, because when Kyle Reese says what he always wondered what Sarah Connor thought of during that moment, she was actually thinking about Kyle Reese. And that's the thing with all Terminator endings, is that they are beautiful in a way, but they are sad. Which is right there at the end of the movie, and it ended up being one of my personal favorite movies of all time. Because in the end, the Terminator had great action, an original story, and some pretty good acting. All the characters were fleshed out, giving them a lot of heart, and it was a perfect way to kick off this franchise. All of this summed up is the reason why Terminator is absolutely legendary. Sorry for this long video. It had to be done. And tomorrow I will have the review for Terminator 2 Judgment Day. It may or may not be fleshed out as this one, but stay tuned for that. But have you seen the Terminator, and what did you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, leave a comment below. And as always, there's a link for my Twitter and my Facebook below as well. Keep in contact with me. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. But in the meantime, I'll be back.